Welcome to On the Middle East, the podcast of the award-winning media service El Monitor, where each week we talk with the decision makers and thought leaders who are making the news and shaping the trends in the Middle East. I'm Andrew Parasolidi, president of El Monitor, and this week we are talking about the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. On March 3rd, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov threw a wrench in the works of what appeared to be a done deal by asking for an exemption to Western sanctions on Russia because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in order for Moscow to sign off on the JCPOA. Less than 2 weeks later, the Biden administration seems to have given just enough assurances, and following a meeting between the Iranian and Russian foreign ministers this week, the parties seem ready to get back to Vienna and work out the remaining details, the stickiest of which for the United States may be whether the administration delists the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, as a terrorist organization. There are few better to talk about Iran and the Iran nuclear deal than Mark Fitzpatrick, Associate Fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, or IISS. Until 2019, Mark was Executive Director of the IISS Americas Office and head of its nonproliferation and nuclear policy program. He is the author or co-author of 4 books about Iran's nuclear and missile capabilities, and he produced a strategic dossier about nuclear programs in the Middle East. He has lectured throughout the world and is a frequent media commentator, including as a contributor to El Monitor, as recently as this week. He joined IISS in October 2005 after a 26-year career at the U.S. State Department, including as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nonproliferation. My conversation with Mark Fitzpatrick about the Iran nuclear deal begins now. Mark, welcome to On the Middle East.
Happy to talk to you, Andrew.
Mark, let's talk about the Iran nuclear deal. That's our topic today. And let's start at the beginning. What is the core concept and conceit of the JCPOA? Who are the players, and what did each party get in the deal?
Right. So if we start at the beginning, we have to realize that this is all about Iran's desire to have a nuclear weapons capability, not necessarily to immediately build nuclear weapons, but to have the future ability to do so. They have a nuclear hedging strategy. And the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, sought to postpone the day by which Iran might have the capability to actually produce nuclear weapons. It dramatically rolled back Iran's capabilities, reduced its stockpile of enriched uranium by 98%, took more than half of its centrifuges offline, and made it impossible for Iran to produce the fissile material for a nuclear weapon in less than 1 year, should Iran choose to go down that path. And probably most importantly, it's often overlooked, there were more intrusive inspection requirements in the deal, requirements which do not expire under the terms of the deal, while the other limits to expire. There were 8 parties in all to the deal. It was the United States and its European allies, that is Britain and France and Germany, plus Russia and China. So those are the P6. And then Iran was a 7th party. And then the European Union was a party in its own right. So hence 8 parties.
And what did Iran get from this deal?
Right. So Iran got the lifting of sanctions, not the complete elimination of sanctions, but the relaxation of sanctions, some immediately, some over a period of time, but it had the impact of allowing Iran to make use of its funds that had been frozen by the United States sanctions. upwards of $50 billion worth of frozen accounts it had access to. And Iran was able to sell oil on the international market freely, which it did, more than doubling its oil sales. And this all was a big boon to the Iranian economy. And of course, what the United States and its negotiating partners got was these limits on Iran's nuclear program and the intrusive inspections.
Mark, you may not remember this, but I was at an IISS event. I think you were chairing when the deal became public. It was one of these roundtables, and many you were involved in, and I too, when we were colleagues, and after. And I remember looking at the document, and of course, always appreciating getting your view on it. And we talked about it. This was considered, and tell me if I'm wrong, or if you agree, I should say, a major achievement for U.S. diplomacy and for nuclear nonproliferation policy.
Oh, I absolutely do agree, Andrew. And I wrote it at the time. I was surprised by how thorough the deal was and how greatly it set back Iran's program. Iran agreed to give up so much of its potential nuclear weapons production capability, in addition to reducing the stockpile of enriched uranium and the number of centrifuges that could produce more of it. They agreed to virtually eliminate the possibility that they could produce plutonium, the other path to nuclear weapons. And then the inspections that they agreed to were remarkable in their depth, and it went beyond any non-proliferation agreement that had ever been negotiated. Sometimes countries have to accept very intrusive inspections and limits if they've just lost a war, like in the case of Iraq after the US invasion there. But this was an undefeated country accepting very intrusive inspections and limits. So it was a terrific deal for the cause of non-proliferation, and it was a feather in the cap of President Obama and his team, who negotiated the deal, and along, with the European partners in Russia and China.
Our U.S. regional partners were not so happy with the deal, and here I'm thinking of Israel and the Gulf states. Tell us a little about their concerns and why they felt their concerns were neglected, and if you think their concerns are justified.
Well, they had legitimate concerns in that what they worried about and still worry about vis-a-vis Iran is not so much its nuclear weapons potential as its other means of inflicting harm on them via its missiles, via its interference in their domestic politics, via its support for non-state actors in the region. And these are, very serious concerns of Iran's neighbors. Israel also was concerned about the nuclear program, but the Arab Gulf states were less concerned about the nuclear problem. And this deal, famously or infamously, only dealt with the nuclear issue. It didn't touch missiles. The United States wanted to include missiles at the beginning of the negotiations, but Iran refused because missiles are so central to its sense of deterrence and defense. Having back in the Iran-Iraq War, when it was attacked by Iraq's missiles and didn't have anything to defend in like kind of weapons, and so it developed missiles. So Iran wasn't going to negotiate away its missiles, and the United States decided that the missiles weren't so much a threat if they couldn't carry nuclear weapons. So let's focus on eliminating the possibility to produce nuclear weapons, and that's what they did. But they didn't touch Iran's. The deal also didn't touch Iran's regional activity or its other problematic behavior. Including everything like that in an all-inclusive deal would have been really impossible to negotiate. It was difficult enough to get the nuclear deal, which Wendy Sherman, chief deputy negotiator at the time, called a Rubrics cube in terms of its complexity. So just one more word about the regional reactions. They did not the idea of even negotiating with Iran, because Iran had been in the penalty box. It had been an international pariah. And this deal gave a legitimacy to Iran's nuclear program and a kind of a de facto legitimacy to Iran as a party in the region and in the international community. And that may be what most annoyed Iran's neighbors, that it now had to be in an environment where this powerful neighbor Iran was deemed a legitimate country.
Another party that didn't find the nuclear deal a benefit to U.S. policy was President Donald Trump. And in May 2018, he withdrew the United States from the JCPOA, which meant that Iran could no longer export its oil or use financial institutions because of U.S. secondary sanctions, and more sanctions were piled on Iran after the withdrawal. And Iran, in response, began to expand its nuclear program outside of the constraints of the JCPOA. Tell us about this period, and more broadly, do you see that Iran's steps from 2018 until now with regards to its nuclear program have limited the ability of a renewed JCPOA? We'll get into that in a minute, but do you think those steps have undermined the JCPOA as it was written in 2015?
Yeah, this is really the crucial time period, Andrew. President Trump withdrew from the deal in May 2018. It's important to realize that Iran didn't respond immediately. They waited a year. They kept their adherence to the limits. And of course, they had been honoring the deal. Trump pulled out at a time when Iran had been honoring the deal. Successive quarterly IAEA reports report after report said Iran was meeting its limits. So Iran was complying, and then the United States stopped complying, but Iran still complied for another year, and then began to break the limits, and in increasingly dangerous ways, and now to the point that what had been a 1-year breakout period of the time it would take them theoretically to produce the fissile material for a nuclear weapon, now they could do in a couple of weeks. And that is all because Trump pulled out of the deal. Whenever you read alarming reports about what Iran has done, sometimes they forget to mention why Iran did it. It's because Trump pulled out. And so Joe Biden on the campaign trail pledged to restore America's commitment. It took Biden a while to get his team together, but entered into negotiations. And yeah, I think we're now at the point where there will be a deal. And it's difficult returning to the deal of 2015, even though the same limits can be applied. In the meantime, Iran has made so many advances in its nuclear knowledge and capabilities that it's impossible probably to return to that 1-year breakout period. 1 year was an arbitrary timeline, but it had the benefit of being a round number, 12 months. And it's probably going to be 7 months or 9 months or something, and there will be a huge political cry about that. But compare that to what we are. We always have to compare a deal, not to an ideal, somebody's conception of an ideal deal, or a unicorn deal, but compare it to the situation otherwise. And we know what the situation is otherwise. It's today's situation where Iran is a screwdriver away from being able to produce fissile material, and is not abiding by the inspection requirements. So a deal will put us in a much more peaceful position.
When President Biden came in, as you mentioned, he gave priority to getting a team together and to getting the U.S. back into the deal. But it's taken a year of difficult negotiations. Some argued, I think this was your position, and please correct me if it's not, that it could have been done much faster in the beginning by primarily executive action of just re-entering the deal. Why did the Biden administration, if that's correct, why did the Biden administration pursued the path of negotiations, and what has been so difficult about re-entering a deal in which the U.S. was already a party or had been a party?
Yeah, well, I mean, I did say that it could be done. It could have been done earlier, but I was not one of those who argued for Biden taking executive action to restore America's commitment to the deal, because there's a problem with that. There's a legal and a political problem with that. Under the terms of the 2015 INARA, Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, um, this president has to certify every 90 days that Iran is complying with the agreement. And if Biden were to have restored U.S. commitments, and that is to say, to lift the sanctions before Iran had come back into compliance itself, then making that certification becomes impossible, and it becomes a huge political problem and legal problem for the U.S. administration. So Biden properly sought a negotiation to bring about a simultaneous return to the deal, a compliance for compliance return to the deal, that both sides would again comply. And it wasn't so simple, because there were sequencing issues that needed to be worked out. There were steps of what exactly Iran would have to do to return to the deal, what the United States would have to do. These are not simple, and of course they needed negotiation. Now, Biden was a little slow in getting those negotiations going, because he didn't have his team on board. He needed to get confirmations from the Senate, which under the previous administration had been very obstreperous, and even some members of Biden's own Democratic Party didn't want to just return to the deal as was. They wanted a tougher deal. So yeah, Biden was a little slow, but then Iran was very slow. Iran, first of all, they wouldn't even negotiate directly with the United States, and they were slow about resuming negotiations themselves. So negotiations didn't really get going until March, April. And then negotiations were going okay. They were being done in a businessman-like fashion, going through all these different issues. And by June, they were ready to strike a deal. But then the Iran election loomed. And rather than wrap up a deal before the June Iran presidential election, the then president Hassan Rouhani said, let's take a break. We'll resume this after the election. We'll let the new, whoever's elected that can look at this, and hopefully we can wrap it up soon. Well, the new team of President Raisi didn't wrap it up soon. They sat on it for 5 months of examining, and yeah, okay, you need some review, but 5 months, I thought they were stalling. And then when they did resume talks in November, Iran was not serious. They came up with ridiculous demands. So Iran didn't get serious until December, at which point there was a text that was being exchanged. It had brackets in it. Brackets means when you don't agree on the language, but you know that there has to be some part of this text. So that was good. They were really serious about negotiating in mid-December, late December. And they could have wrapped up by January, but there was this haggling, more haggling, or let's get a better deal. And they could have done it then. And then at the beginning of this month, March, when Russia almost looked like it was going to block everything by demanding that its trade with Iran be protected despite the sanctions over Ukraine, I thought, oh my God, if only this deal had been done earlier. But fortunately, Russia walked back from its demand, and we're back to where it looks like there's only a couple issues left, and those issues should be able to be overcome if everyone really does want a deal.
Mark, as I understand that there are 3 issues. One you alluded to, which was the sequencing. If you could tell us a little more about what that means, and second, relatedly, was Iran's issues with the IAEA about a previous investigation into Iran's noncompliance and producing records and information that the IAEA had asked about previous nuclear work. And then I'll follow up with a question about the third issue, which regards foreign terrorist designations.
Right. So these are all complicated issues. How can I simplify? The sequencing, I hesitate to say too much about the details because I don't know what the details are, other than it's clear that there will be some sequential calendar for when different elements of the deal will begin, and having this timeline of different things happening on different dates, and called implementation day or some other words will be used, that will allow Iran to satisfy its demand that there be verification that the United States has lifted its sanctions. Now, such a verification is not really what's going to happen, but there will be, I think, some initial release of holds on blocked funds, for example, and Iran's return to the limits and other aspects of its commitments, may be staggered. So this might all happen over a period of 3 or 4 months. I don't know exactly. I look forward to diving into the details when the deal is actually announced. But that's the sequencing issue. I think it's to deal with Iran's need to have some kind of verification that they're getting actually benefits out of the deal before they give up all their leverage. This issue about IAEA investigation of the evidence that they had been conducting undeclared nuclear activity because some nuclear particles had been picked up by previous environmental sampling. That's not specifically part of this deal, but it is very much an issue because of if Iran continued to block IAEA investigation, if they'd continued not to answer IAEA questions, then there would be in the quarterly meetings of the IAEA Board of Governors, there would be a demand to censor Iran, to criticize it, and actually they should be faced with a safeguards violation judgment, and that would have been totally in keeping with IAEA rules, but that would have set back negotiations, because under those conditions, Iran's political leadership would find it very hard to agree to a deal. So Iran negotiated with IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, and they worked out some tentative process whereby Iran would address questions, and if they were satisfactory, then by June, the IAEA would put them to rest. If they weren't satisfactory, the IAEA would keep up its investigation. And it's a little complicated, and I'm not sure that this process that was negotiated is going to actually work out to anyone's satisfaction, but it was a way to kick the can down the road of this difficult issue of the undeclared nuclear activity.
Mark, one of the trickiest issues is the designation of the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as a terrorist organization. Iran has asked that they be delisted, and the IRGC designation as an FTO, as it's known by the acronym, was done under President Trump. So as a means, I think, to make it difficult to delist them in the dish as an added complexity if a subsequent administration sought to re-enter the JCPOA. But this is tricky given the IRGC's activities in the region, including most recently an attack on Erbil in Iraq. So how do you see this issue playing out?
Yeah, Andrew, thanks. The way you've put this issue in context is very good, because the foreign terrorist organization designation was explicitly applied to the IRGC in a political context whereby President Trump was trying to put a roadblock to his successor in any effort to restore the JCPOA. So this was not, I mean, yeah, there is a legitimate legal case for calling them an FTO. The lawyers did a proper job and satisfying the requirements for it. But gosh, calling a military organization, a part of the government of another country, an FTO, it had never been done before. FTO designations were used, and the whole issue, the FTO came about to deal with non-state terrorist groups, not governments. And so it was improperly applied, I think, even though legally it may have been correct. Now, to Iran, it's vital to get this lifted, because the IRGC is so important, because of the political weight attached to this issue. And it's unfortunate because it's a false issue in the sense that under the deal that to restore the JCPOA has to lift all sanctions which would impede implementation of the deal. That's the principle, and both parties have voiced different variations of this principle. You lift sanctions that would otherwise impede the economic benefits to Iran, and Iran makes the case, well, IRGC is a very important economic organization. It's a military organization, but it also has huge economic interests. It's got these, controls boneyards, parastatal economic activity, and it's said to be involved in maybe 20% of the Iranian economy. So sanctioning the IRGC would seem to impede the full benefits of the JCPOA. But no, it won't, because the IRGC is going to be sanctioned anyway. There's a whole raft of other sanctions which apply to the IRGC. So lifting the FTO won't materially change the IRGC's ability to interact in the international financial arena or anything. So that's why I call it a false issue, but it's politically such a touchy issue, both in Iran and the United States. I think the United States is going to have to lift the designation. There will be cries and hollers from the critics of the JCPOA, but I think if we remember what you just said, that this FTO designation was done for a political reason to try to block Biden. Well, they didn't know it would be Biden then when they put it on. And so Biden should take the political decision to unblock it.
Mark, there is a related issue regarding U.S.-Iran relations and the nuclear talks, and that's regarding Americans and other foreign nationals held in Iran. We saw that 2 British nationals were released this week. That could be a good sign. There is hope and expectation that perhaps even the 4 Americans who have been held may be part of the deal or a related complementary negotiation that may be going on, and that's including our friend and colleague Siamak Namazi, who's the longest held, going back now over 6 years. So do you see these negotiations over foreign nationals and the Americans held in Iran as part of the talks, and do you expect them to be part of the package, whether directly connected or indirectly connected to what's happening in Vienna?
Oh, I think they will be part of the package. They're not obviously directly part of the JCPOA in any way, but they have to be part of the package. The chief U.S. negotiator, Rob Malley, said this in January. It's hard. He said it was hard to conceive of U.S. going back to the deal if there were still American citizens being detained in Iran. And then, the fact that, as you said, the two of the 3 British Iranian dual nationals are now back in freedom is a tremendously good in its own right, but also very good as a premonition of what's likely to happen in the coming days with regard to the U.S. prisoners. I fully expect that they will be released in connection with the JCPOA being restored. And it's, the Biden administration needs it, not, well, they need it in its own right, because getting Americans back, and our friend Siamak, and it's just part of American ethos of getting our people back. It's also very important politically for Biden. If he's going to take a big political hit and make the risky decision to lift the FTO designation for the IRGC, he needs something politically beneficial in return. And I think the return of U.S. citizens will be an important way to balance the difficult decision he will make on the IRGC.
Mark, do you think the region, including American partners such as Israel, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, who have their concerns about the JCPOA and the regional security environment, as they did in 2015, do you see steps being taken that might mitigate some of their concerns this time around?
Yeah, I think, for example, in relation to the IRGC, if they are de-designated, Iran will have to make a commitment that the IRGC will scale back its activity and its extraterritorial activity, and that if they don't, or if they resume this kind of actions, that the U.S. could retrigger some sanctions. So, but apart from that, I want to just deal with the basic question of, is this deal really bad for America's regional partners? And the way I see it, the answer is absolutely not. And that's also the way that many Israeli security thinkers see it. They argued that it was very good for Israel when the JCPOA was adopted, because it removed the most serious threat to Israel. Israel has many other things to worry about, but this now wasn't one of them. And then when Trump withdrew and then Iran ramped up its nuclear program, well, then that issue again was on Israel's lap. So Israeli security thinkers will be quite happy if Iran's nuclear advances are again rolled back. They might not be, those who are in office, who are still serving as government officials, won't be able to say so. But those who used to be in office, I think we will hear from them that indeed it's good for Israel. As for the GCC states, I think that getting restoration of the JCPOA opens possibility for other deals with Iran. The talks between Iran and the Saudis, which really aren't going anywhere, aren't necessarily going to succeed if the JCPOA is restored. But I think restoring the JCPOA and restoring a sense of commitments being honored will help talks in other areas.
Mark, you've given us a clinic today on the Iran nuclear deal. Thank you so much for joining us on the Middle East.
Quite welcome, Andrew. This was a pleasure, and I really appreciated the opportunity to expand on these issues beyond the short clips that I get when I get interviewed by the normal media.
Well, we appreciate it, and we appreciate your contributions for Al Monitor. As I mentioned at the beginning, you've got a great piece on the site this week, and I look forward to being in touch on these issues as we have been for many years.
Okay, Andrew. Good. Great.
Thank you, Mark.
And happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you. Same to you. We will return after this short break.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Elizabeth Hagedorn, and I'm the State Department correspondent at El Monitor.
And I'm Joe Snell. I'm El Monitor's video editor. Let's admit it, this past year has been difficult to stay on top of the news and sift through what's accurate and what's misleading. Let El Monitor help you.
If you care about the Middle East and North Africa, you should consider listening to El Monitor's audio series On the Middle East with Andrew Parasalidi and Amber and Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspi. You can now watch our newest video podcast, Reading the Middle East with Gilles Capel. You can subscribe to these series on your favorite podcast platforms.
And through a host of free daily and weekly newsletters, we offer a range of perspectives with the highest journalistic standards. You can subscribe to these newsletters at elmonitor.com.
As an award-winning media service headquartered in Washington, D.C., El Monitor has a network of over 160 contributors around the world.
So if you haven't done so already, be sure to visit elmonitor.com, where you can find all of these newsletters and podcasts along with first-class reporting and analysis.
Thanks to our guest, Mark Fitzpatrick, and our production team of Beowulf Rockland and Rosabelle Hine of Two Squared Media Productions. We will be back next week, and if you haven't done so, please sign up for all 3 of our El Monitor podcasts at your favorite podcast platform. Reading the Middle East with Gilles Capel, whose guest this month is Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa, CEO of Rappler, the digital media website. And On Israel with Ben Caspit, where Ben this week speaks with former Knesset member Ksenia Svetlova, who grew up in Russia and later made Israel her home. And of course, this podcast will be back next week too, On the Middle East, where Amber and Zaman will be here with another decision maker or thought leader from the region. Thank you all for listening, and please keep up with all of the news and trends in the Middle East at elmonitor.com.